One of the biggest problems we see today in modern day society is a mind-body disconnect. This is one of the primary reasons as to why we are seeing such mental health problems and chronic disease. I'm going to explain this to you in this video. So what is mind and what is body? I was recently at a seminar and someone asked, what is mind? And it was quite a challenging thing for people to really answer. However, mind for me is those cerebral processes that allow us to have top-down control over our body, over our emotions, over our experience. It's the cognitive component of our thoughts, our predictions, our futures. The body, however, is our sensory information. It's the felt information that is coming from our external and our internal integrated into information sent to the brain to then get turned into a feeling that will then communicate through into our thoughts to create cognition. The mind-body connection is the essence of these two things working together. Now, people can have a positive mind-body connection. We might be able to measure this by someone who has a awareness of their sensations in their body, their state. Their heart rate variability might be more elevated, given more opportunity to be more self-aware. However, there are people who are disconnected from their body. And for me, there's three main categories. But before I goes into the categories, I'm just going to tell you a little bit of a story of my own self and how I became disconnected from my body and what my body's shown me. So in 2016, I left my friends and my family and my life behind in the UK to move to Australia. And when I moved to Australia, I'd realized as a scientist, I'd made a pretty poor career choice. I went from working in two of the largest hospitals in the UK, most funded hospitals in the UK that had a lot of research, a lot of new equipment, to a small little private clinic in Perth where I was at the bottom of the hierarchy. However, my job was pretty simple because it wasn't that busy. So me as a 26-year-old male, single, the other side of the world without too much responsibility, earning a reasonable wage, decided that I'm going to meet people and ended up going out and drinking a lot and partying and sex, drugs, rock and roll, etc., etc. I was injured at the time. I had bad hips. I could hardly train. And what I'd noticed, or what I eventually noticed, was that I had begun to drift away from who I truly was. Now, at my heart, I love health. I love science. I love caring for people. But I essentially went down and created a persona to try and impress people that I didn't need to impress, to try and create friends. And this led to a rabbit hole of becoming anxious and depressed. And eventually, I came out with neck to toe in thick plaques of psoriasis. That for me was a bit of a warning sign. I was shameful. I was embarrassed. I couldn't go outside. I couldn't wear anything that was short sleeve because I was just covered in, this huge thick rash. This spurred me to start trying to make changes in my life, starting to get back into eating healthy again. And this is where I got into breathwork. I got into doing some form of yoga that had some slow breathing. However, because I couldn't sit still and I couldn't sleep because of the insomnia that I was struggling with, I started to smoke cannabis. And this led me to get into a really deep, relaxed state whilst I was doing these yoga practices and breathing really slowly. And I remember one day reading into what is psoriasis at a cellular level. At a cellular level, it's essentially the skin cells are growing too fast for how they can shed. After I read that night when I was sat meditating and breathing, what came up for me was that's a sign that I'm trying to grow a new me without letting go of my old self. I'd become disconnected from my true values. And that allowed me to revisit my core values in my life and realize that I wasn't living a value-aligned life. That became the trigger of a new journey for me of self-discovery, of trying to figure out who is it I wanted to be. For me, the warning sign was the psoriasis, the inflammation, the stress. The mind and body are not separate entities. They're intricately interlinked. Mind and emotion create physical manifestations and vice versa. It just so happens that the breath is at the center of all of this, and it can teach us lessons. So in terms of the three ways people can become disconnected, or the most common disconnects I see in society, is number one is through panic and fear, through a lack of safety in one's own body. When people do not feel safe in their own body, it's more better to shoot out it and dissociate and disconnect from the body, from the feelings and the sensations, because the person doesn't feel safe. Therefore, it's an escapism to be in the mind or to be completely dissociated and be living in a dream world. That is going to be associated with things like panic and anxiety. However, we also have what I call self-worth disconnects. People who are not comfortable with who they are and truly in where they are in their life, chasing external validation. I've been there. That is from a lack of self-worth. It's related to fear. And therefore, the individual is disconnected from their own purpose and their own self, their own internal soul, a confused mind and body. And then there's what I call performance disconnection or performance dissociation. This is your likes of your army soldiers, SAS individuals, your high-performance athletes who don't really want to be experiencing the sensations, the injuries, the illnesses, the emotions, their family crisis going on when they're trying to reach a target or a goal. This is driven purely through training and motivation and drive and dopamine to achieve and accomplish a mission. These three things, whilst they serve a purpose, and in the moment they can actually be an adaptation or beneficial, i.e. when we're performing, long-term is going to create a further disconnect, and it's going to lead to chronic disease because people don't know or won't recognize when they need to regulate themselves. Throughout life, certain feelings that we will get, feelings in the literature that I read, which is in neuropsychoanalysis around Mark Solm's work, are essentially what we call affect or affective emotion. This is breaking off from affective neuroscience work by Jaak Panksepp. Now, affect, which is the carrier wave of information from our biochemistry, our interoception, our exteroception, into feeling to try and create a generation of thought to drive a behavior to try and bring us back into balance. Now, typically that will bring us back into balance, i.e. if we get hungry, we'll eat food. If we drink, if we get thirsty, we'll feel thirst, we'll get water or we'll get a drink. However, people have been and will be disconnected from affect. Affect generally has an arousal dimension and a valence dimension. People can feel highly aroused and low aroused, high energy, low energy. People can feel negatively valenced in terms of negative feelings or positive valence. Now, what affect allows people to experience is someone who has high arousal and a positive valence generally can experience things like elation, excitement, happiness, glee. When people have a low arousal and negative valence, they're continuing to feel that, they're going to feel more sadness, depression, fatigue, lack of energy. So the affect itself is the feeling that drives the experience. On top of that, what is learned is then the emotion that we actually have, the cognitive recognition of that experience that we're feeling. This is where the issue can become disconnected. Through conditioning, through learning throughout life, we can become disconnected further and further from what our basic instincts are. Our basic instincts are feelings of motivation, of fear, of anger, of excitement, of lust, of care, of play. These are all basic emotions, panic and grief. However, as we go throughout life, we learn how to relate to those instincts. And there might be traumas that have occurred or might have been behaviors or habits that we've learned throughout life that make us become disconnected or feel guilty or shameful about these experiences that we have. One of the primary ones is panic attacks. Panic attacks and anxiety attacks are conditioned responses to internal sensations. Let's say, for example, someone's in a car crash. They wake up unconscious in a car crash and they start to hyperventilate. They will create symptomology, dizziness, heart racing, feelings of air hunger or feelings of mechanical resistance in their breathing. This is going to generate a sensation that is going to become conditioned and learnt to a particular environment. Now, this might not necessarily be the external environment, but the internal environment one perceives. So next time this person, 2 weeks later, when they've recovered, tries to get into a car, what do they experience? They experience the same sensations again. Now this person believes that the car is causing the fear, being unaware that the internal sensations are being projected outwards. As within, so without. So without, as within. Our internal and external environments between exteroception and interoception communicating together to generate this affect. Now, this is important when it comes to working with people who might have high levels of anxiety, who might have high levels of panic, because we need to learn how to re-navigate the conditioning, how to get them to unlearn that conditioning. But the first thing we need to do is ensure that they don't have that high level of arousal, otherwise they're going to be very reactive. We can use exposure to sensation to start to have people unlearn the conditioning, to be able to relearn a story associated with what they're feeling in their body. Now, you can't do this if you don't feel safe. So each individual, your person with panic and anxiety and a disconnect or dissociation related to panic, or the individual who is dissociated because of their self-worth, or the person who is dissociated because of performance essences, need to have different structures. They need to have different language, different communication patterns. They need to be framed differently, and at different time points do we expose them to different experiences. This is all information that I will help people with in the breath science certification. This is information that I try to provide clarity around, not just within how to do the process, but how to spot the human's behavior and the language and the communication skills that we can actually provide to ensure that this person gets adequate results. So the mind-body disconnect is a huge part of why we are seeing so many issues in today's society. Anxiety, panic, depression, even chronic disease such as high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease. The amount of sleep apnea, the amount of clients that I saw in my clinical career who had heart attacks just out of nowhere. He was fit and healthy. They come for the sleep apnea test and they've got severe sleep apnea and not even aware that they're tired of or struggling mentally and physically. We are disconnected from our physiology, from our body, because of this performance aspect or this cognitive aspect or this fear aspect that's been ingrained into us. When we reconnect to our body using the breath, we start to learn information and build awareness, and we can start to practice and change our lives. We can relearn our conditioning that we've learned from throughout our life, and therefore we can start to become our true selves. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe, drop a comment, reach out to me on social media, Performance Through Health. I'd love to hear from you. Next week, we're going to be talking about breathing and exercise.